Hey there. So, I'm certain this will not be the last video on these subjects. So, to get right into it, a while back I was kind of doing some research. No, not really doing research, but an article, I found an article that was obviously very political, and it was written by a religious person. I mean, one involved in the Church of Governance. And his objective in this article was political in the nature that he was manipulating the story of Christ in order to prove what God's thoughts are, what God's opinion is, or what God's will is concerning the idea of abortion. So what he did is he tried to imply that Christ's resurrection was nine months from his birth. See, the real truth here is that Christ was, first off, he was not born in December. This whole thing came about because it was Christmas time, and I was doing I was writing some articles on Christmas, and this article that I was looking at on the computer, on the internet, came up, and this was by this guy who suggested that if Christ was born in December, then his resurrection, as it were, would have been 9 months from his death, because he is a divine will and he can pick and choose the time of his death and the time of his resurrection, actually. And he tried to say that it was 9 months away, to show politically that personhood was at conception. And this was his sort of like logical proof and argument, using the story as his evidence and proof. You know how there are rules to debate. He was kind of using this as a sort of like an evidence trail to prove his point. See, but the real truth here is, yes, God did pick the time of his death and his resurrection. And guess what? His resurrection was on the exact same day as his birth. Because who in antiquity would have known that the gestation period for the human fetus was 9 months? Nobody. So for them then to know that this was real, very powerful, I mean, they probably couldn't accept that it was God on earth. But for me to know, I mean, I know that this was God on earth. And the validation of that, ultimately, is the same as it would have been for them. The very fact that God's resurrection was on the same day as his birth. Because this is a divine being, and he is not subject to the random. And there is why it would be. So, the real truth then about when is personhood, it is not at conception. The real truth of personhood is that it is at the first breath. Because you see, God is manipulating the physical to bring about the conscious state of the human mind, the human soul. It is irrelevant to him whether or not, look, God set in forces, I'll digress a little bit here, but God set in motion the forces of evolution that brought forth the human form. You see, now, ultimately, it's irrelevant to God if or not it was mammalian, reptilian, or amphibian, so long as it had this kind of generalized form as we are now. Any of those ecosystems would have been just fine with God. So now we're mammalian. And therefore, it is not the physical form that is important to him. What is important to him is the spiritual state of consciousness. And when is there validation of that spiritual state of consciousness in the human being? It is at the first breath, not at some politically contrived moment of conception, based on what we now know by science that we didn't know in antiquity. So you see, when I saw that article, then I knew this truth, that the real truth, that the divine moment of personhood is at the first breath. And too bad y'all miss it. You know, you're going through this medical procedure and you don't get to experience the moment that the child actually breathes for the first time. And in that, you miss the divine expression of creation upon what is, up to that point, the biomass of evolution. See, now, as it is a biomass until it takes the first breath, it is not a divine expression until that moment. So before that, it is nothing more than the biomass of evolution. See? Now, with that as the real truth, all this stuff that the religious right says, you know, that God, how God hates abortion and all that kind of stuff, and that it's murder. Well, it isn't, really. It's not, as long as the fetus does not become a baby and achieve consciousness by taking the first breath, then it is not like a criminal thing. It is not murder. In all truth, now we're talking about what is the real divine truth. The divine truth is the divine moment of personhood is at the first breath, not at conception. Because the spiritual state of consciousness is what is God's objective in creation, not the body, not the physical carcass. So let's get things right. Now, as far as like the nature of human sexuality goes, we're going to have a lot of conversations about this, because this is what the church has used as a way to criminalize people, is in the nature of sexuality. It's amazing how you people can't even have a conversation about it without becoming offended. And in that, it shows the level of maturity that you have, the true level of human development that you put on display. Because if you cannot think this with that enough to embrace the full range of human sexuality as it is within us, the human being, and boy, are you ever a waste of time. Because God chose to take a portion of his divine will and craft it into you, the unique being that you are, and then give you the full range of human emotion and the potential to experience it in order to craft you individually unique. And what do you then do? Oppose your individuality and deny the true nature of what could easily be expressed sexually. Because for some reason, the church wants to govern, and what they use as that methodology is this concept of sin. And what they have defined as sin is the very thing that God has hardwired the human body for: sexuality. To the point to where even a person's identity as created by God is defined through that expression. See, and in that is why it is necessary for you to be the real, genuine human being you are in your heart, and to live as that, because in that life you will then experience true love, where as a conformed identity in denial of your true individuality, good luck with experiencing any kind of true love, because now you're just practicing deception, the smoke screen of contiguous deception in order to say that you are one of the group or something. In order to submit to the requirement of conformity put upon us by a state of governance, both from government and from religion. So, ultimately, it's really amazing how religion is always, in this present state of human development, religion, the very thing that represents God, is ultimately against God here. See, God created the individual to be unique in the expression of self, and yet the church demands conformity to a one life lived in one way only lifestyle. I mean, right down to having hot dogs on Wednesdays. Amazing. So, to conclude this video here, and to kind of draw things together, and also leave the door open for the next videos, whenever those may be, that will cover these subjects of human sexuality and abortion. It is not a crime against God for an abortion. Seriously, because it's just the biomass of evolution until it takes first breath. It's unfortunate that a church of governance has manipulated that truth and brought forth a lie in order to maintain their authority to govern. Because that injures a lot of people. I mean, everywhere. In all of the sexual things that the church says people should deny themselves. You see, the church really is about denying yourself. It's about denying the true you of you. It's about denying your real human heart, your real human soul. I mean, the sexuality bit's just the tip of the iceberg. Because now, see, there is enough, the drag coefficient upon society through an inadequate religion is high enough to where it's getting our attention. And in that, guess what? This unchangeable dogma of God and perfection is going to change. And may society be ripped apart then, until it does. And that rip will come, it's already here, basically, that momentum of history that pushes aside this dogma and opens the way for a new one at the will of God to then replace it. And hopefully it doesn't require the complete upheaval of society in order to do so. But that is what is upon us in this time. And that is why the truth is elusive in this way. Because you're in the darkness of ignorance. You're in the darkness of fear. So, with that, stay tuned for more. And I'll see you again next time.